Now.
Okay, so we continue on. Lamed Hey Omen Aleph and Bava Metzia, Barak Mafkid. We were discussing Shavuos and what Shavuos, remember the principle is that we want to avoid Shavuos. So we start with that principle, but then Rav Huna gave us a principle that said that a shomer always has to make a shvua that he has not converted the property to himself. That's an absolute shvua he has to make in order for everyone to believe that what happened was perhaps an accident or it was stolen or something. But that's a shvua you have to make, and it's midoraisa. So that's the shvua that we go forward with. And we also go forward with the shvua midoraisa of modeh b'miktzos. Now, what is modeh b'miktzos? Modeh b'miktzos means that if I say I lent you $100 and you say no, you only lent me 50, then you have to swear on the other 50. But if I say I lent you $100 and you say, for instance, I paid you back, or I gave you a mashkin for $100, so that there is no admission, the critical word, no admission of any type, then even though I counter what you say, I don't have to make a shvua. The only time you make a shvua is if you counter differently than the person tainet. So if I tainet to you $100 and you say, no, the mashkin was 100, no problem, no shvua. If I say I lent you 100, you say, no, yes, but mashkin was 75, then you have to swear in the difference of value for the mashkin. That's the general principle of swearing for modeh b'miktzos. So those are the two shvuas that our Gemara concerns ourselves with, and that's what we discussed last week. Now, we are at on Lamed Hey Omen Aleph, about maybe 10, 12 lines from the top, where we finally get into the question. Rav Ashi Omer, Rav Ashi says, Zeh nishba v'zeh nishma. In the case of the malva and the loveh, where there's a dispute as to what is actually the transaction, the malva has to swear and the loveh has to swear. Zeh nishba she'ena b'rshusa. The malva swears according to Rav Huna's principle that he doesn't have it. It's not in his possession. He has to swear. Zeh nishba kama habashava. And the loveh is the one who has to swear how much it's worth. In other words, if the malva says it's worth $100, and the loveh says no, it's worth only 75 or whatever, that's a shvua that belongs to the loveh. And this is what the Gemara means to ask. Mi nishba tchila. You have two shvuas from two different people, and the Gemara asks, who makes the first swearing? Who swears first and who swears second? Says the Gemara, malve nishba tchila. The malve has to do the first swearing. Why? Because of the principle of Rav Huna that he has to swear that he doesn't have it. We say that he has to swear first, because if he doesn't swear first, then if the other fellow swears that it's worth 75, he can pull a fast one and say, oh, no, I do have it, and it's worth 100. And now you're disqualified from any future edus. So in order to preserve his integrity, the loveh's integrity, we say the first, the malva has to swear that he doesn't have it. Now that he doesn't have it, there can be no sort of cross. There can be no controversy. And then the second fellow swears as to the value. Now he can swear to whatever he wants, because who's going to counter him? The malva already said, I don't have it. So that's what the Gemara means when it says, Zenishba v'nenishba, that both have to swear, both the malva and the loveh. The malva according to Rav Huna's principle, the loveh only by modeh b'miktzos. Remember, we're talking modeh b'miktzos, not when he counters and says, I'm not admitting to anything. And the malva has to swear first in order to clear the way for the loveh to be able to say what he has to say. Right? So that's how the Gemara wants to, Rav Ashi wants to posit the case. Now, so based on all this comes Rav Huna bar Tachlifa Mishmei de Rabba. Rav Huna bar Tachlifa says in the name of Rabba, and he says Reisha the Seifa to Yufta the Rav Huna. Okay, this is a different Rav Huna. This is Rav Huna about Tachlifa. He says that the Reisha of the Seifa is a kasha on Rav Huna. What's the Reisha of the Seifa? Remember, in the Mishnah, we had 4 cases, 2 belonging to the Malveh and 2 belonging to the Loveh. So the first one belonging to the Malveh, we said, was where the Malveh says, I lent you $100, and then the mashkin turned out to be $100, then nobody, it's equal, nothing happens. If the Malveh says it's $100 and the Loveh says, no, it's, let's say a seller, we use the word seller, and he says, no, it's a shekel, means only half, then he has to swear motive mixes. Okay, that was the ratio. That was the 2 cases of the ratio. The 2 cases of the Sefer were similar, but the Taina came not from the Malva, the Taina came from the Lova. In the first case, the Malva says, I lent you a seller, and the Lova says, and I gave you a mashkin for the same amount, for the same seller. And then the second case was where he disputed and said, no, it was only 3 dinrim, and therefore he had to make a shua for 1 dinner. So the Gemara says here that the ratio of the Seifa, the case where the Love responds to the Malva and says, no, that my mashkin is equal to your loan, so there is no swearing. There's no shua here. So he says, Zeh tiyufta l'Rav Huna. That becomes a kasha to Rav Huna. Why is it a kasha to Rav Huna? And so this is the case. Kasha l'Rav Huna. Sela halisini olav. The Malva says, I lent you a seller. Shtayim hayeshava. And the Lova responds and says, but the mashkin was worth 2 salaim. Bahalo oma lo ki ela sela halisicha olav. Sela he shava potter. So in other words, as long as there was no dispute, there was a dispute as to the amount of the loan, but the Lova was not modeh b'mitzvos. In other words, he didn't admit to anything. He says, no, my mashkin was worth at least as much as yours or more. Then there is no shvua. There's no shvua because there's no modeh b'mitzvos. Remember, we said that the 2 shvuas, one was that the Malva has to swear that he no longer has possession, and the second shvua is the modeh b'mitzvos shvua. Now there's no modeh b'mitzvos because he's not admitting. And if we hold like Rav Huna's principle that a Malva has to always swear, and swear first, mind you, that he doesn't have the article in his possession, the coin or whatever. My mishtaba Malva she'ena b'shuso mishtaba nami agilgul shvua. When he is swearing that it's not his reshush, let him already swear gilgul shvua kama havashava. You remember that we had this earlier in Bava Kama, I think in the first parak, we had something called Gilgul Shvua. What is Gilgul Shvua? That when there are 2, let's say you're in the middle of a transaction, for one part of the transaction you have to swear, and for the other you don't have to swear. So normally speaking, if you don't have to swear, you don't make a shvua. But if you're already making a shvua on part of the transaction, then the Torah tells us we're megalgel, we roll in the second shvua and you make it at the same time because you're already making a shvua. So that's called Gilgul Shvua, and Rashi points out to us. Rashi says, Al Gilgul Shvua, says Rashi, the Tana she'ein bo shvua, im Tana she'yesh bo shvua, megalgel of shvua lishava al shteihem. On the second matter as well, the Gilgul Shvua to Araisahi. And in other words, as the Gemara brings down the introduction, Gilgul Shvua is a deraisa. So the principle of Gilgul Shvua, says the Gemara here, why do we say that according to Rav Huna, you have to make a Shvua? What's the Shvua? I don't have it in my possession. But since there is no dispute, there's no modeh b'mitzvos on the second item, there's no Shvua, the Lover doesn't have to make a shvua. There's no motive in mixus. Let's make the Malva swear. The Malva should swear Gilgal shvua that this is the value of the coin, because that's what he's saying. We wouldn't force him to make that shvua. But since he's already making a shvua, let's already roll the second shvua in. Yeah, Jay.
When you take into account what's going on here, the Rabbanim don't want to have somebody make a shvua if they're not, because it may be a bad shvua. And also you want to encourage commerce. So why don't we automatically, the Malva is a good guy. He lent money to somebody who needs some help. Why shouldn't we give the Malva at least the benefit of the doubt that when he says, I don't have it, why should he have to swear? And because that would discourage people from lending money, which is against what the Rabbanan want. So it seems like there are two things stacked up here that say it's much better not to end up with a Malva making a shvua.
Well, so your point is really well taken. It's Rav Huna who's being mechadish to us and saying, notwithstanding what you just said, Jay, that we don't like shvuas. We don't encourage shvuas. We don't want shvuas. But, says Rav Huna, I have to be sure that the Malveh didn't succumb to temptation. And maybe, just maybe, he's an honest guy, he's an Ehrlichty guy, but maybe he saw an opportunity here where there was a very nice item that he was holding. And he said, you know what, who's going to be the wiser? I'm going to pay for it anyway. I'm not stealing it. I'm going to pay for it. So he rationalized, we'll take it, we'll pay for it, and the world will go on well. Says Rav Huna, you know what? We have to avoid his temptation by saying across the board that when someone is holding an item as a mashkin, then as a matter of course, the deraisa, you have to make him swear that he doesn't have it. It shouldn't be a big deal because he doesn't have it. So you're not really going to chill commerce. It's just it gives everybody a sense of confidence that I can trust you. I can trust you with a mashkin and not worry that you'll do something which in your mind will justify as okay because you're paying me for it. You're not stealing, you're paying me for it. So therefore, Rav Huna, and it's Rav Huna who adds this, it's not all the other Paiskim. It's Rav Huna. Now, Rav Huna is obviously a very substantial Paisik. He comes and says that we have to make this Shavua in order to make sure, like you said, that commerce is not interrupted by people doing something not right.
So this then becomes a deterrent to know that you have to make a shvua just to guarantee that everything is kosher.
That's correct. It's a deterrent, and if you know you have to make it, then you're not going to convert the property, and people will continue to lend money. In other words, it's not a chilling effect. It's just making everybody comfortable that what's going on here is correct. So then the Gemara's kasha is a good kasha. You're telling me that the Malva has to make a shvua, and the Lova then makes his shvua, and the shvua is as to the value. We have an edict that there's something called Gilgal shvua. In this particular case, according to Rav Huna, of course, the Malva has to swear. He must swear that he doesn't have it. That's a given. And since he already swears he doesn't have it, and the Gemara says that the second shvua, there's no motive of mitzvah, no one's going to swear. Make him swear because of Gilgal. What's the big deal? Gilgal shvua, he already made one, let him make the second shvua. Now, again, the whole question of we don't want to make excessive shvuas, and we don't take shvuas lightly. We get all of that. That's all very much in the mix. But it's kind of like one principle against another. So what's the principle of Gilgal shvua? Principle is that when you have a situation where you're making a shvua no matter what, and then there's the second tinus, or there's the second issue which doesn't require a shvua. Torah says, make the shvua, you're already there, make the shvua. So that's the kasha of the Gemara. So why do we then say that either there is no second shvur, or the second shvur should go to the lover. Why should it go to the lover? The malva is already making a shvur that he didn't convert, that he didn't take the property. He'll swear at the same time as to its value. That's the kasha here on this Gemara. And it's a valid kasha. Okay, so that was the kasha before. Comes with Ashi, and Rav Ashi, this is very interesting. This question that we just discussed came before Rav Kana, and so Rav Ashi was waiting for Rav Kana to give a psak. Very interesting answer. He says, you know what? The Lovet trusted the Malveh. The Lovet trusted the Malveh as to what the value was. Therefore, there's no shvur. Now, this is introducing a new concept to us, because in our parlance, in our discussions, we never had a situation where we forgave a shvua because we said there was trust. In other words, it's kind of like the old Reagan mantra: trust but verify. I believe in trust, but also verify. Says the Gemara, no, trust is enough. Also, the Lovet trusts the Malva. When the Malva says it's worth 100, it's worth a sell-out, he trusts him. Therefore, he doesn't have to make a shvur. It says the Gemara, Nami, Bahai, Kamahabashava. She says, Lokim Begave. So, in other words, here the distinction is who understands the value of the item better. Is it the person who owns it and is giving it as the mashkin, i.e. the lovet, or is it the malva? So the Gemara wants to make a distinction and say, you know what, that the lovet knows the value because it's his item that is being given as the mashkin. The malva doesn't know the value because he's just receiving an item. So, for instance, I'm transacting with you, David, and I'm a jeweler, and you're lending me $1,000, and I'm a jeweler, and I know my business, so I take out of my packet a jewel that's worth $1,000, and I say, here's the mashkin. This mashkin equals the amount of the loan. Would you say to me, you don't know what you're doing? Of course not. You'd say, you're an expert, you're a baki. You know what jewelry is worth. If you tell it's worth $1,000, so it's worth $1,000. Now, flip the script and say that the love gives the malve a jewel, and the malve says it's worth $1,000. What does the malve know about jewelry? He knows nothing. He's just getting a mashkin. He's just getting a collateral. So in other words, it's possible to say that the love believes the malve, or one way or the other, the love doesn't believe the malve, and the malve believes the love. In other words, they're not necessarily fully equal because one is a mumcha, one is a baki, and one is not a baki. So Rav Nachman's answer, Gehebi Memino, doesn't quite work because v'nemele l'malve nami bahai kama havashava. So according to Rav Kana's answer, we should believe the malve also when he says it's worth a seller. Says the Gemara lo kimle begave, he doesn't know the values. V'nemele malve l'love kimle begave lo mehem. So frankly, the Gemara maishno loive the mehemen leila malve maishno malve lo mehemen leila loive. So then, why are you making a distinction that the lover believes the malve, but the malve does not believe the lover? In other words, it should be the other way around. If the lover is the baki in the collateral, then he should be believed. The Gemara is saying that the malve doesn't believe the lover, but yet the lover believes the malve. So the Gemara says that's an anomaly.
So excuse me,
The
Rabbi.
one who should be believed is the expert, and he's not being believed. So the one who shouldn't be believed is the guy who doesn't know a diamond from a piece of glass, and he is being believed. So the Gemara says, what's the chilek? How do we understand this? It's something that doesn't make any sense. Go ahead, Jay.
Isn't it? I mean, we're getting into the fact that we've introduced that the lover happens to be an expert.
Right.
But you could also say the malva can say, look, I want to bring over my expert, my jeweler, and I'll have him evaluate it. Why do we have to take your evaluation, even though you're in the business? Somebody else may have a different opinion of it.
Yeah, no. It's not, you're right. It's not to say that can't happen. We're just saying that in the moment, there's just the two of us there, a malva and a lover. Nobody else is present. So the question is there nemonis? Is there nemonis between us? You're right. If I'm a malva and I can bring an expert, then I bring an expert, and there's no issue.
But the love is no geya b'davar. He has a vested interest.
He's no geya b'davar, but obviously the Gemara's situation is when two people know each other, they're friendly. As I know you, you know me, and so if I'm a jeweler, you say, you know what, I'll trust you. I know who you are. I know you're an honest guy, and I know you're a jeweler, so I know you'll give me an honest opinion. Yeah, you could always maybe take the time to get a third person, but we're talking just as between the two of us. The Gemara is saying that the lover will believe the malva, but the malva will not believe the lover. So the Gemara asks the question: why should that be? Why if the lover? In other words, what's the circumstance that we say that they're not equal? You can always say they're not equal, but why are they not equal? So the teretz is really what we're trying to get to, and the teretz is a little bit.
Rabbi, the reason they're not equal is because the malva is giving up, he's loaning something and he's taking collateral on faith and trust, as you said. So the malva is doing something out of goodness of his heart.
Right.
And so the fact that he's giving up, he should at least have support for that value. It's not necessarily saying that this guy is the lova is dishonest, but there are a lot of things that are points. Like you said, he's not dealing in jewelry, so he has to accept that value, but he may not be able to sell it for that value. So I think the malva is different in this,
the malva is different, right? And no, good. That's a very good distinction. It's a good distinction to make. The Gemara is just asking, in general, why is there nemonis? Your point is right, that the malva has to take extra caution because he doesn't know what he's doing. He's getting a piece of something, and he has to accept that that's worth the value that the guy is saying. But if we're talking about veracity, why is the veracity of one person not equal to the veracity of another person?
Because their risk is different. Their risk is different. In other words, the lova is getting, he knows what the value he's getting because he's getting the amount in that, the exact amount. Right. There's obviously fluctuation. If it was jewelry, there's fluctuation in those prices. So he's the one who's giving up. He has to accept on trust. He's already giving the money on trust.
Right. No,
it's a double yield.
You're trying to justify why there's a good reason to say that the malva shouldn't trust the lova, even if the lova trusts the malva. I accept that. I accept that. There are those inherent reasons while the malva should have some concern. You're right. The malva should have some concern because he's doing a good deed. He wants to make absolutely certain that his mashkin is iron proof and that there's nothing going on over here. So let's say I accept that. But the Gemara is asking, notwithstanding, is there another reason? Is there another reason why nemonis doesn't flow both ways? Let me put the question that way. That's why the answer will give us a little bit of clarity. Is there another reason why nemonis doesn't flow equally from the malva to the lova as it does to the lova to the malva? That's the Gemara's question. In general, not in our case here where there's Bekias, Michael. Where there's Bekias, you could say, oh, he's a Bucky, or you could say, he has to rely on the fact and he's already doing a good deed, so this, that, and the other. I'll grant all that. But the Gemara's kasha goes beyond that. The Gemara says, in general parlance, is there a difference between a malveh and a loveh? I think that's how we have to couch the question. Is there a difference between veracity from a malveh to a loveh and a loveh to a malveh? That's really what the Gemara is.
We should normally expect symmetry on both sides.
You should expect symmetry. You should, right. We're both Yidden. We both are committed to the same principle.
Right.
So listen to this answer. It's hard to wrap yourself around this answer, but the reason why I'm saying it the way I am is because I want to make this a generic question, not a question necessarily that applies to our principle, to our case here with the loan, but in general, a malveh and a loveh, are they different and why they're different? So listen to this. So now let's go back into the Gemara. So Maishno Malveh, the Lomehem, the Loveh, and the Loveh, the Chaim Be Malveh. And for the Gemara, this is the last two lines before the wide lines. He brings down a posuk in Mishlei, and the posuk says, "Thomas Yisharim Tanchein, B'Salif Vodim Yishadeh." Now this is an amazing posuk, because the Torah, what the Navi, what we're telling us here is that, and by the way, this is a concept that I don't think any of us have ever accepted as sort of a valid way of looking at people. So look what he's saying. He's saying that if a person does yasha, a person does the will and the ratzon of Hashem, then he's going to be rewarded. How is he going to be rewarded? He's going to be rewarded because he will become a malveh. He'll have money to loan to other people. So his actions in the world, the things that he does, will lead to his status. That's pshat, tomim yisharim tanchem. On the other hand, the salif bogdim yisharim, someone who isn't so ayayay, someone who doesn't do the right thing, he will wind up being a borrower. In other words, he's going to be on the short end of the straw. He's not going to be a malveh. So the pasuk is telling us that this is an amazing thing. The reason why there's no monis to the malveh is because the malveh is being rewarded by the Rabbanu Shalom for being a good guy, a tamim, and therefore he is a malveh, therefore he lends money, and therefore he has veracity. However, a borrower, now, chas v'shalom, we don't say that a borrower is a rasha or a borrower is a bad guy, but according to this pasuk, the loveh has less nemanis, because why is he in this matziv that he's a loveh? Because he's not such a ay guy, right? To me, I mean, I read this pasuk and I looked at the different mepharshim with Suda, and it's an amazing thing to think about. But in the abstract, what it's telling us is that Hashem rewards the righteous, and he punishes or penalizes or doesn't reward those who are not righteous. But when you think about it, that's not the way we Yidden look at things. We don't look at things and say, "Oh, you know, he's a good guy." So, in other words, there are plenty of poor tzaddikim. Let's put it that way. There are plenty of poor tzaddikim. So what do they do wrong? They're good people, and they don't have money. So, but yet from this pasuk, what we glean is, again, what we're trying to answer is why there's nemanis. Why is the loveh quick to believe the malveh? Because he's saying the malveh is a tamim. The malveh is a yashadika guy, and the Rebbeinu Shalom gave him the ability to lend money. Michael, as you say, to do mitzvahs with his money. So he does a mitzvah with his money, he becomes a lender. We have to give him nemanis. On the other hand, the poor fellow who doesn't have the money and who has to borrow, he, on the other hand, is not as believable. So the malveh doesn't put his trust into the loveh. Difficult concept. I have a difficult concept with understanding what the depth of the pasuk really means, because we all know that it's not shava b'shava. I mean, But
Rabbi, the only thing I'll say is this: they didn't have the concept of millionaire stock traders who only bought on margin.
Right, right. But Michael, sometimes you say to yourself, you have a wealthy guy, how does he become even more wealthy? How does he become so super wealthy? What is it that he has? What chush does he have that he's able to make money, that he's able to capitalize and everything else? And so we can, in the abstract, we can say, okay, he's a smart guy and everything else, but we all know the truth, that there's mazel as well. There's all kinds of things involved. And it's the Rebbeinu Shalom who's pushing the strings here and giving him that opportunity. So what this pasuk is saying is that giving that person the opportunity to do the mitzvah, to be the wealthy guy, to do the tzedakah, to do the halva, to help the other guy, makes him, gives him more veracity. It gives him, you believe in him because he's a good guy. Now, you don't know behind the scenes, but he's doing good. The other guy, Nabuch, doesn't have two nickels to rub together. He doesn't have. So
it's the same concept with tzedakah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will watch over you if you do the right thing, and God will make sure that you are provided for in the best way possible.
Right.
Is this same Nemanos that we're talking about? Would Besdin take the same view that one is believable more than the other if a case comes to Besdin? Besdin has to judge it. They have to judge it on the facts.
They have to judge it on the facts, no question. But here, no. So this case is outside of Besdin. This case is simply a case where there were two people who were transacting privately, and the Gemara is trying to show us that there was sort of an unequal balance between the two, because the Love has confidence in the Malveh, and therefore he's not challenging him. Therefore, he's not making him make a shvua of modim mitzvahs, which is a derisive shvua. He says, don't make that shvua. Don't be megalgel shvua. Don't include that shvua into the regular shvua on my account, because I trust you. I trust that you are an honest person. So we're not really getting into Bezdin and all those other issues. It's a question of you and me, and what is our relationship? And then, so I will trust you. The Gemara says, but why don't you, the Malveh, trust me, the Lovet? You should trust me. I know the value of this item. And if I tell you that it's worth a seller, you should trust me. I'm a jeweler. I mean, there's no reason. Why are we unequal? So the Gemara answers, we're unequal. And that's when he gives this answer, is because, no, certainly he could trust him. There's no question that he could trust him. But he says we're unequal because of the general principle that one person has, because he is rewarded by the Rabbeinu Shalom, and he is a lender. And again, difficult concept. This is not an easy concept to embrace. But because he's a lender, he's a tamin. Pasuk calls him a tamin. He has nemonis. A person who is not a tamin, and chas v'shalom, we're not going to say that a borrower, just because he's a borrower and doesn't have money, that he's not a tamin. But as a general principle, the Torah wants us to understand that's why there's an imbalance in nemonis, is because the haves and the have-nots, the haves are more believable than the have-nots. Now, that you can make a whole social justice comment on that that's not fair and that's not right. Why do we say that because someone is poor or he doesn't have, that he should be less believable than someone else? And that's the fair question, and that's what makes this pasuk a little bit difficult to understand. Is how we justify this.
Well, the Torah forbids a court, of course, from giving any prejudice in favor of the poor or the rich, either way.
That's correct.
Either way.
Correct.
But this whole thing is in the world of loans, which, as you'll point out, mostly are tzedakah anyway. They're not commercial transactions. They're secured with a mashkon, but they're not for interest, and they are basically tzedakah. But the psukim from Mishlei are, I think, an attempted realism, as you say, as to, in general, if the guy has the money and the other one doesn't have the money, one is more likely to have been blessed up until that point. But the Torah certainly is very much biased in favor of giving loans.
Right.
And it certainly prevents you from showing any prejudice for the poor or the rich, either way.
Right. Now take a look. There's an interesting Rashi. It says, "Love mekayim b'malveh." The Love trusts in the malveh. Mikro zeh homeless yishorim tamchem im lo she'odam nemon v'yosher. In other words, we're extrapolating from that pasuk. If not for the fact that a person was a nemon and a yosher, lo hava ma'asran oso min hashomayim, we would not have rewarded him from Shemayim, Shenema, Thomas, Yishon, Tanfe. So somehow in this discussion, spiritually and on a higher plane, the Rabbi Shalom is saying that people look at a wealthy person, like you say, David, and also Michael. They are the lifeblood of the community because they're the one who give the loans. If people don't have money, you have to go to them. So you have to give them some deference. We know that fair or unfair, a rich person in the community is accorded certain honors because if he does good with his wealth. Why? It's not his wealth, it's the Rabbi Shalom's wealth. But the Torah says he is the mashkin, he is the shaliach. So if the Rabbi Shalom deigns to make him the shaliach to do good, then you have to give kavod to that. That's what this pasuk is really coming to tell us, is that you have to give a certain nemonis, a certain deference to someone who has been given the opportunity to do good and does good. If he's been given the opportunity, he should do good. There says there's a Yetzirah. He can always not do good. So the fact that he does good means that he's being given deference, and that's pshat in the pasuk. I have to tell you, it's a hard pasuk to really put your head around and to think through that there should be this relationship. But if you separate it out a little bit and say, all right, first of all, we don't mean it as a comment on a person's stature, if he's poor, if he's rich. That's the one the Banishon gave him. That was his that's his lot, and that's what he is. But nevertheless, when it comes to like you say, transactions, we're talking not stocker, we're talking about commercial transactions. There is a bias in favor of the person who has the money, that he has an emunus because he's doing good by you. So you don't bite the hand that feeds you, and basically you accept him as the as nemonis. But the other way around, if a person doesn't have, he's a little bit suspect. Again, take it under advisement. This is not, it's not as clear as we'd want it to be, but this is the pasuk that they quote. And I went through all kinds of different mefarshim to see whether or not anybody comments in some way on this pasuk, and there's not really any strong comment that changes the pasuk pshat. In other words, it's really something that we have to sort of accept, and but it doesn't mean that generically every poor person is not good, or is Russia, and every person with money, unfortunately, we know is not a tzaddik either. Okay, so that ends this Gemara, and we say at the end that again the whole question of Shavuos is one that has some sensitive issues to it, but we didn't answer the question of Gilgal Shua because we said we're in a position where there is perhaps an emunus, veracity from the Loveh to the Malveh, so it doesn't completely vitiate the principle of Gilgal Shua, because we know Gilgal Shua is deraisa, that there are cases when you make a Shvua and then that second Shvua, which you would not normally make, you just include it because it's there for the taking, so to speak. So that's how the Gemara wants to give an answer. All right. So now let's switch to a slightly different topic, which is related but has a different implication here. Ahu gavra the afgit kipi gave chave. So a situation is like this: a person has a very expensive item. Rashi says nazmin. It's an earring. He has an earring, or a pair of earrings, and he's going on a trip. And he says to his friend, why don't you hold these earrings for me? They didn't have safe deposit boxes. Why don't you hold this earring for me until I get back? Omale Havli Kipi. He comes back from his trip and he says to his friend, okay, now please return my earrings. Omrulay, so the Shomer says, Lo Yadana Hechosina. I don't know what I did with it. I know I could put it away for safekeeping. Now, what is he? He's a Shomer Chinam, right? He's a friend. He didn't get paid. He just was a nice guy. And he said, you want me to hold the earring? I'll hold the earring. He holds the earring. And now the fellow comes back and he says, please return my earring. And he says, Lo Yadana Hechosina. I don't know where I put it. Okay, simple case. Also, the Kamadir of Nachman. So they came before Rav Nachman. He was the Paisik. Omalei, Kol Lo Yodana Shiosahi. When someone says, I don't know what I did with it, that's pshia. That's carelessness. And we know that a shomer chinam is only chayiv for pshia. So since you're a shomer chinam, you held the item, you are chayiv for pshia. Okay, so far so good. What did he say? Zil shlim. Go pay the value of the earring. The earring's worth $1,000. Give him $1,000. You don't have it. Okay. Lo shila. He didn't pay him. Also, Rav Nachman agabe lepadne minei. So Rav Nachman, who was the Rosh Bezdin, ordered that they should take. In other words, he ordered the Bezdin that they should take from the shomer, from the fellow holding it, an item of value. In this case, he had a house, and the house obviously was of some value. So he says, go seize the house. The sof ishkach, hippie the ikr. Now, throughout this period of time, this particular earring increased substantially in value. So let's say it was $1,000 when he gave it to him as a mashkin, and now, because of the rise in jewelry prices, it's now worth $5,000. It's worth $5,000. But in the meantime, when Rav Nachman ordered that the house be taken as the mashkin, the house was approximately, let's say, $1,000. So he said, take this house for $1,000 in lieu of the ring of the earring for $1,000. But now the ring has become worth $5,000. Omer of Nachman. So it comes of Nachman. Ishkechei, no, so the sofa Ishkechei, he found the ring. He found the ring, the earring rather. He found the earring and had gone up in value. Now the dilemma is, what do? The owner of the nose ring of the earring rather has a house worth $1,000. That's what he was given. The fellow who was the shomer, who now found the ring, has a ring worth $5,000. What do? Omer Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman paskins, hoda kipi lemore, v'hoda apinde lemore. Take the house and return it to its original owner, and take the earring and return it to its original owner. So what is Rav Nachman saying? Rav Nachman is saying, notwithstanding the values, because the values now are very different than when you started out in this episode. So l'chayra, what's the real kasha here? What's the real kasha? We say that Shilem le'rotza l'shava, based on our Gemara, Shilem le'rotza l'shava, that he pays and he doesn't want to swear. What does the Gemara tell us he's entitled to? He's entitled to kefil, right? We had a whole discussion earlier that if a person wants to pay and preserve for the owner the basic value of his item, he won't profit on it, but he won't lose. And then later on, they find, let's say, the ganef, who gets kefil? Kefil is the one who is holding ownership. Who's holding ownership? The person who paid for the item. In this particular case, what happened? The earring is not here anymore. Rav Nachman said, you got to go ahead and pay. He says, I'm not going to pay. Bezdin goes ahead and takes the house from him in lieu of payment. Now, the earring is found. So he is shileng. He's shileng. He pays. So the chayra right there when he's shileng, he is the owner of the earring. He's already paid for it. Now the earring is found, and the earring has gone up in value twice, 3 times. What do you think should happen? What should happen here? He should keep the earring. He paid for it. The other one has the house, which he got as the exchange, and everybody is happy. The owner of the earring has a house that's worth what the earring was worth. He's not a loser, because if the earring was worth $1,000 and you got a house for $1,000, he didn't lose anything. Yet, Rav Nachman says, return it to him. So that flies in the face of what our Gemara says. Our Gemara says, that here he didn't swear that he didn't do anything wrong, and we make him pay. And as a result of that, the Gemara says you're entitled to kefel, you're entitled to the proceeds of what happens later on. And here the Gemara is saying that Rav Nachman is literally undoing the transaction. And he says, so how does that work? Doesn't make sense. The whole Gemara
Rabbi, I disagree. I think you're restoring everyone to their original position. And I know it contradicts what we learned earlier about kefil, but you're, by virtue of restoring the original item into the lova's hands, you are recreating what was. It was supposed to be a shomer chinam. It's supposed to be watching it, no advantage to either one, and an advantage created. So the best alternative is to put them back where they were in the beginning.
Okay, I would accept that, Michael, except for the fact that a few weeks ago, we went through a very detailed piece of the Gemara where we said, and the Mishnah says, if a shomer, right, your shomer, says, you know what, I don't want to swear. I made a mistake, I'll pay for it. I'll pay for it. And the Torah and the Mishnah says you can do that, and as a result of that, the owner will convey future profits, i.e., kefel, to you. So the Gemara, the Mishnah is telling us exactly what you just said. That the rather than saying I swear that I did not do anything wrong here, he says no. I take it upon myself that I'm going to pay because I want to do the right thing by the owner. And the owner says, thank you very much. You've restored my item. I'm not out a nickel. And as a result of that, I'm going to switch the rights to kefel to you. That's exactly our case.
But Rabbi, this is a different case because the Beis Din seized the asset.
Okay, you're okay. So you got ahead of us. Okay, okay. So Michael is saying something which the Gemara is going to answer in a minute. That there's a difference.
He looked ahead.
That's okay. Okay, Michael. So hold the point. You're right. You are absolutely correct that there is a difference in the cases. But the kasha is a terrific one. Why should Rav Nachman say, give him back, make everybody the same? That's exactly what the Gemara says we don't do. Okay, so let's just go through that Gemara, and Michael will get to the answer. So Omar Rava Havi Yisivne coming to Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman did this. He switched. He gave everybody back their own. Rava was sitting in front of Rav Nachman, who pirkin hamafkid hava, and they were learning hamafkid. Rava was sitting with Rav Nachman and learning our Gemara of hamafkid, right? The Gemara we're learning today, the Omrele, and the Gemara says Shilin le'rotza l'shava. I'm repeating what we said before. Shilin le'rotza l'shava below hodeli. And he didn't answer me. So Rava said to Rav Nachman, why are you doing this? Why are you giving him back each one their own? We're learning hamafkid, and hamafkid says that you don't return. Says Rava, "V'shaka ovid ovidly," and he did well by not answering me because he was asking Rab Nachman. Rab Nachman is the Beferish Gemara. He's entitled to kefil. If he's entitled to kefil, why are you giving each one back their own? So he said, no. My Tama, Michael, your point. In other words, if you're going to Bezdin and Bezdin has to intervene, then Bezdin has the kaya to undo what they've done. They gave it, they made each one pay, but because you use the good offices of Bezdin, Bezdin is now a player, and they can say, no, wait a minute, you get yours, you get yours. Our Mishnah, there was no Bezdin. It was simply a case where the item got lost, and the fellow said, you know what, I'm not going to let you, owner, take a loss here. I'm paying you. No Bezdin, nothing, I'm paying you. Now, when that happens and he does it voluntarily, then what does the owner do? Out of gratitude, the owner says, you know what, thank you very much for restoring my item. I'm going to give you kefil. I'm going to give you future profits because you're a good guy. You paid me. You didn't make me take a loss. Therefore, I'm going to give you the future profits for kefil. That's a big difference, Michael, as you point out. So in other words, it's a chilik whether Bezdin gets involved, in which case they can undo what they did, or Bezdin doesn't get involved. It's just a matter of you and me, and we can transact ourselves. Correctly, it says the Gemara, Lamemra, the Savar of Nachman, the Shuma, Hader. Are you going to tell me, based on this, that if someone seizes a property, it can always be redeemed? In other words, the chayra from here, it seems that a property was seized, right? And Bezdin allows it to be undone. So we want to extrapolate from this that if, let's say, Michael, you and I transact, and I owe you something. I give you a mashkin. I give you my diamond watch. And my diamond watch is equal to whatever it was that we were dealing about. Does that give me the right at a later time to come to you and say, Michael, I want to redeem my watch. You must let me redeem my watch for its value. That's the question that's coming up here as a result of this, is because the mashkin was used to pay. Now, is that the end of the transaction? Or not? The Bezdin undid it. Or do we say that once I've given you the watch, you can say, fine, I have the watch, I don't want your money. So that's the kasha the Gemara is asking now. Lamemra, the Sover of Rab Nachman, who said that Bezdin can undo what was done, are we saying that Rab Nachman is saying the Shuma Hader, that if you see something, you can automatically take it back? And for the Gemara, Shani Hossam, the Shuma Betoshu. It was a Shuma, it was a taking Betos, the Kohava Kife Mi'ikara. So the Gemara gives us an interesting answer and says, you know what? This is not a normal case where someone stole or someone took the property, and therefore you are chayiv to pay and you have to pay. The property was there the entire time. The shomer, in our case, misplaced it. He didn't know where he put it. So he really had it all the time, but now he doesn't know where it is. So in order to make good to the owner, he says, you know what? I'm paying you for it. So says the Gemara that's why Rab Nachman wasn't quick to give an answer, because he's making a distinction where an item was misplaced. And therefore, I found it. I want to give it back to you. I want in other words, let's go back to where we were, that I'll give it back to you and you'll give me back my money because it was never stolen. So the whole idea here is, according to this view, according to Rab Nachman, that Shuma, the idea of seizing something to pay, it's a pretty powerful thing, because if I pay you with an item, that item is the replacement value. He says, yes, that's true in the normal course. But if there was a mistake made, and here mistake meaning that he misplaced it, and we're going to see the next Gemara is going to make a distinction between misplacing and having it stolen, where it's totally out of your possession. If it's still in your possession, but it was misplaced, then you are entitled to what's the word? To pay money and get your diamond back. In other words, you're not stuck having to have given him that item because it was a mistake. The Shuma B'Tolsu, the Gavahava Kafi Miikara, but keeping the Ikara because the earring was in his possession from the very beginning. So let's just finish. Omer Nerdoi comes Nerdoi, he says, Shuma Hoder Atresa Yarchen. A seized item can be redeemed up to 12 months. In other words, in this particular case, if I can't find the item and I give you something in its stead, I have 12 months to redeem that item. And a Maimer says, I am from Nadoi, and I have a different view. A seized item can be returned forever. In other words, if I give you an item in lieu of what was lost or stolen or missing, I can always redeem it. Why can I always redeem it? The Hilcha says Shuma Hoda La'olam Mishum Shenema V'Osisa Hayosha V'Hatov. Okay, so now we're getting down to the real the underpinning of all of this is what's happening here is that a person who was a shimer, he lost the item, he has to pay. Okay, so he takes something of real value and he gives it to him. He's reluctant, but he doesn't have the money to pay, so he has to give him an item. So the question is whether or not, having given the item, he has now given up rights to that item forever. So the Gemara comes to a conclusion. Again, it's using the pasuk. What are we all about? We're all about fairness. So in fairness, that item should have been returned at the very beginning, but it was lost. So we're not going to penalize the fellow and say, you lost it, now forever you're going to have to suffer the consequences. So there is a machlokes here, whether or not it forever means forever, but for purposes of this discussion, what we're saying is that you have rights to redeem the item that you have given as the mashkin, as the repayment. You have rights, whether it's 12 months or forever. And he uses the pasuk, which we'll see how important that is next week when we complete this thought. Is that yeah, you have to repay him in some fashion. You have to repay him. You can't let it go. The question is now, what this opens the door to the question of whether or not the person who is the person who lost the item, who has to do the repayment, whether he has any rights, whether he has rights of redemption or no rights of redemption. And by the way, the halacha, I mean, in our common law, there are similar questions that we pose as to whether or not a person has rights that he can retrieve an item that he used as a payment. There is that concept does exist, and the laws are what they are. In other words, there are times that you can redeem it or not redeem it. Maybe you have to pay interest. There's a whole thing attached to it. Obviously, here there's no ribis, but the question is, from the perspective of the person who receives it, would he rather just keep what he got, a nice diamond or a nice piece of silver or whatever it is, or would he rather have his money back, the money that he originally lost? So that's the concept, that's the principle here. And according to this mandam in Nadoi, it's the hasisa, the hayasha, the hatoiv, try to restore order, try to restore things to where they were. And if you find the mashkin and you can return it, and redeem it. In other words, the guy he can redeem it for money, that you should allow him to do it, and you shouldn't be difficult and say, no, you gave me this item in repayment for what you lost, and I'm not giving it back to you. So that's the underpinning of the discussion, and we'll see further. But to your point, Michael, we see that the Gemara does say that there is a difference between people who transact privately and people who transact through Bezdin. Once you transact through Bezdin, Bezdin has a certain kayach, a certain involvement that it can undo transactions or not. Whereas if the two of us are just doing things privately, then it's different. It's not, there isn't a third party Bezdin who comes in and strong arms its way through, and therefore there is a difference of opinion as to whether or not one can return. But it's an interesting concept. And by the way, this concept, we'll continue it, but this concept is a valid concept even today in halacha as to whether or not a person can redeem the item that he has given as payment if reluctantly he gave the item and now he wants the item back. The question is, can he redeem it? Okay, so we'll stop.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
Shkoyach, Rabbi, shkoyach.
Yeah.
Good week, everybody.
Okay, shkoyach, everybody have a good Fourth. Be safe.
You
And
too.
We'll finish to the Mishnah. We'll go to the next week.
Okay.